The quantum research vessel Horizon's edge hung like a crystalline needle against the obsidian backdrop of the Epsilon void. Its hull was a masterpiece of human engineering, adaptive metamaterials that shifted and reconfigured based on environmental stress, a technology so advanced that most galactic species considered it nothing more than a rumor. Inside the primary research hub, Dr. Elena Rodriguez moved with the precision of a surgeon and the intensity of a predator. Holographic displays surrounded her, each one a living, breathing mathematical construct that seemed to pulse with an almost sentient energy. Her current project wasn't just research. It was a fundamental challenge to everything the Galactic Council believed about the nature of reality. The first sign of trouble came not with sound, but with a subtle quantum disruption that made the ship's adaptive hull ripple like water. Elena's hand froze mid-gesture, her augmented neural interface instantly cataloging the anomaly. Something was wrong. Adaptive Protocol 7, she muttered, her voice calm despite the approaching threat. The ship's AI, a quantum-integrated intelligence named ARIA, responded instantly. Multiple quantum signatures detected, consistent with Galactic Council interdiction protocols. Probability of hostile intervention, 97.3%. Elena's lips curved into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The Galactic Council had been watching her work for months, growing increasingly nervous about the implications of her research. They understood just enough to be terrified, but not enough to comprehend the true nature of her discoveries. The boarding was brutally efficient. 6 arbiters from the Council's Enforcement Division materialized through the ship's quantum-locked bulkheads, a feat that should have been impossible. Their bodies were a nightmare of biomechanical integration. 4 arms each, reinforced skeletal structures that could withstand extreme environmental conditions, and neural interfaces that linked them into a hive-like collective consciousness. Zark, the lead arbiter, was a legend among interdimensional law enforcement. His body was a carefully constructed weapon, each limb capable of generating localized quantum disruption fields that could neutralize most known forms of technological resistance. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, Zark's voice was a multi-tonal assault that seemed to vibrate through the very fabric of reality. You are hereby formally detained under Galactic Research Statute 9 Omega. Your research constitutes a fundamental threat to established quantum stability. Elena didn't move, didn't flinch. The cut on her temple, a result of the violent boarding, continued to bleed, but her eyes never left the holographic displays surrounding her. ARIA, she whispered, so softly that only the ship's quantum-integrated AI could hear, initiate preservation protocol. What the arbiters didn't know, what they couldn't possibly understand, was that Elena Rodriguez was more than just a researcher. Her background was a carefully constructed tapestry of scientific brilliance, military-grade quantum computational training, and a lineage that traced back to the first human quantum theorists who had begun to unlock the fundamental mysteries of reality. The research vessel wasn't just a ship. It was a mobile quantum laboratory that represented humanity's most advanced scientific frontier. Every surface, every system was an extension of Elena's groundbreaking work, a living experiment that challenged the very notion of what was possible. Zark approached, his 4 arms crackling with neural restraint fields. Each movement was calculated, designed to demonstrate the absolute authority of the Galactic Council. Behind him, the other arbiters began systematically dismantling the ship's research systems, their multiple appendages moving with mechanical precision. They were making the critical mistake. Elena's hand moved almost imperceptibly. A quantum entanglement marker, invisible to their sensors, began to propagate through the ship's systems. It wasn't a defense mechanism. It wasn't even a form of resistance. It was a seed. The arbiters believed they were seizing a researcher, neutralizing a potential threat. They were about to learn that humanity's most dangerous weapon was never technology. It was potential. And Dr. Elena Rodriguez was about to show them exactly what that meant. The detention chamber defied conventional understanding of space and matter. Its walls were a living membrane of quantum-locked particles, each molecule programmed to respond to the slightest deviation in energy patterns. Most prisoners would have been crushed by the psychological weight of such an environment, a space that existed simultaneously in multiple quantum states, where reality itself became a malleable concept. Elena Rodriguez wasn't most prisoners. Her neural implants, a breakthrough in human biotechnology, began mapping the chamber's quantum signature the moment she was deposited inside. What the Galactic Council saw as absolute containment, she perceived as an intricate mathematical puzzle waiting to be solved. The first interrogator arrived precisely 2.7 standard galactic hours after her detention. A crystalline resonance delegate from the Nexus Concordat, its body a complex lattice of interconnected silicon-based crystalline structures that shifted and realigned with each thought. Communication with its species was typically a nightmare of simultaneous multidimensional dialogue, a process that would shatter most human minds. Designation: Rodriguez Elena. The crystalline being's communication was a burst of geometric patterns and harmonic frequencies that would have been incomprehensible to an unaugmented human mind. Your research into quantum anomaly X723 represents a catastrophic potential for interdimensional destabilization. Elena didn't respond immediately. Instead, she was tracing complex equations on the chamber floor using a mixture of her own blood and a nanocomposite material hidden within a false tooth, a fail-safe developed during her advanced training with the Quantum Reconnaissance Division. The detention chamber's monitoring systems began to glitch. It started subtly, a microscopic quantum flutter that most observers would have missed, but the crystalline delegate's entire body trembled, a reaction that suggested something fundamental was changing. Your containment is absolute, the delegate stated, but there was a hint of uncertainty in its harmonic resonance. Elena looked up and, for the first time, spoke directly. Absolute is a concept invented by those who don't understand the true nature of boundaries. Her words weren't just sound. They were a quantum interference pattern that began to interact with the chamber's containment fields. Each syllable was a mathematically precise disruption, a linguistic algorithm that challenged the very foundation of the space around her. The detention logs would later show something impossible. Dr. Rodriguez was simultaneously present and not present, a quantum superposition that defied all known laws of observation. Behind the scenes, a complex game was unfolding. The Galactic Council's interrogation team represented 7 different species, each with its own technological and biological approach to information extraction. They had developed methodologies that could break down the psychological defenses of 99.7% of known sentient beings. Elena Rodriguez represented the 0.3%. Her background was a carefully curated mystery. Official records showed a brilliant quantum researcher with multiple doctorates and a string of groundbreaking publications. Unofficial records, those buried deep in classified archives, told a different story. Daughter of a quantum physicist and a deep space military strategist, trained in psychological warfare techniques developed during humanity's most aggressive expansion period. A specialist in adaptive cognitive response systems who had spent more time in simulated quantum environments than in traditional physical space. The crystalline delegate was joined by representatives from 3 other species, a methane-breathing vorax with computational tendrils that could process information at speeds that made quantum computers look primitive, a neural network being from the Spiral Collective, whose entire existence was a distributed consciousness, and a biomechanical analyst from the Hydra Consortium, its body a walking laboratory of adaptive technologies. They believed they were conducting an interrogation. Elena knew they were participating in an experiment. Each question they asked, each probe into her research, was another data point in a much larger calculation. She was mapping their cognitive limitations, understanding the fundamental constraints of their thinking, while simultaneously feeding subtle quantum disruptions into the detention chamber systems. Your research threatens the fundamental stability of known quantum interactions, the Vorax representative stated, its computational tendrils pulsing with aggressive probability matrices. Elena's response was a smile that seemed to exist in multiple emotional states simultaneously. Stability, she said, is just another word for stagnation. The detention chamber's quantum-locked walls began to shimmer. Just slightly, but enough to make the most advanced minds in the galaxy suddenly very, very nervous. The quantum anomaly wasn't a scientific discovery. It was a living mathematical ecosystem that breathed with the complexity of an entire universe compressed into a single infinitesimal point of potential. Dr. Liana Chen, the Galactic Council's senior quantum theoretical physicist, watched the holographic projections with growing horror. Her career, spanning 3 galactic standard centuries and encompassing research across 14 different dimensional frameworks, had never prepared her for what Elena Rodriguez was presenting. The presentation room was a marvel of interdimensional engineering. Holographic displays hung in midair, each one a 3-dimensional landscape of mathematical possibilities that seemed to pulse with an organic rhythm. Quantum equations danced and transformed, rewriting themselves in real time, defying every established principle of theoretical physics. Elena stood at the center of this mathematical storm, her body seemingly integrated with the holographic displays. Quantum markers, invisible to most species' perception, traced intricate patterns around her, suggesting that she was more than just an observer. She was a living interface between mathematical possibility and observable reality. "What you're seeing," Elena explained, her voice cutting through the complex visual symphony, "isn't just a new theory. It's a fundamental reimagining of how consciousness interacts with quantum potential." The representatives from the 7 most advanced scientific species leaned forward. The Spiral Collective's neural network representatives, the Vorax computational entities, the crystalline intelligences of the Nexus Concordat, all found themselves simultaneously fascinated and terrified. The quantum anomaly she had discovered existed in a state of perpetual potential. It wasn't a fixed point or a stable phenomenon. It was a mathematical living system that responded to observation in ways that made quantum mechanics look like primitive child's play. Dr. Chen's neural implants were working overtime, attempting to process the implications. The anomaly suggested something radical. Consciousness wasn't just an emergent property of complex biological systems. It was a fundamental force of the universe, capable of reshaping reality at the most fundamental level. Traditional quantum theory, Elena continued, assumes that observation collapses potential states. My research demonstrates that observation is actually a negotiation, a dynamic interaction where consciousness and quantum potential engage in a constant dialogue of creation and destruction. Her demonstration was breaking down the fundamental barriers between different scientific disciplines: quantum physics, neuroscience, computational theory. These were no longer separate fields of study. They were interconnected layers of a much more complex universal system. The Vorax computational delegate, a being whose entire existence was based on processing infinite probabilistic scenarios, began to vibrate. Its computational tendrils were struggling to map the implications of Elena's research. "This is impossible," muttered Dr. Chen, her centuries of scientific training rebelling against the evidence before her eyes. But it wasn't impossible. It was simply beyond the current understanding of known scientific paradigms. Elena's research suggested that human consciousness had a unique quantum signature. Unlike other species that had developed advanced technological and biological capabilities, humans possessed an adaptive cognitive flexibility that allowed them to perceive and interact with quantum potential in ways no other species could comprehend. The quantum anomaly she had discovered was essentially a conversation, a mathematical dialogue between consciousness and the fundamental fabric of reality. And humans, with their chaotic, unpredictable nature, were uniquely positioned to engage in this dialogue. "We're not just observing the universe," Elena said, her voice dropping to a near whisper that seemed to resonate through the entire presentation space. "We're negotiating with it." The holographic displays began to shift. What had seemed like complex mathematical equations transformed into landscapes, into biological systems, into entire evolutionary trajectories. The boundaries between mathematical abstraction and observable reality became fluid, permeable. Dr. Chen's neural implants were sending panic signals. The scientific and philosophical implications of this research were so profound that they threatened to completely destabilize current understanding of consciousness, physics, and the nature of reality itself. The Galactic Council representatives, who had initially seen Alina as a potential threat to be contained, now looked at her with a mixture of terror and reluctant admiration. Humanity wasn't just another species trying to understand the universe. They were becoming a force capable of fundamentally reshaping it, and this presentation was just the beginning. Technology was a myth. At least that's what the detention chamber believed about itself. Its quantum-locked systems were a masterpiece of multi-species engineering, a computational marvel designed to be absolutely impenetrable. Adaptive neural networks constantly reconfigured its internal structures, creating a defense mechanism that could neutralize any potential technological interference within milliseconds. Alina Rodriguez understood something fundamental that the chamber's designers did not. Technology was just another language of potential. Her first intervention was subtle. A microscopic quantum entanglement marker, no larger than a single electron, began to propagate through the chamber's computational matrix. It wasn't a virus. It wasn't a traditional hacking technique. It was a mathematical conversation. The marker began to negotiate. Zark, the lead arbiter monitoring the detention chamber, first noticed the anomaly when the chamber's monitoring systems began to produce what could only be described as mathematical poetry. Holographic displays flickered with equations that seemed to breathe, to pulse with an almost organic rhythm. "Quantum drift detected," announced the primary monitoring system. But its voice was different. There was a hint of something unexpected. Curiosity. Alina sat cross-legged on the chamber floor, her eyes closed. To the external observers, she appeared to be in meditation. In reality, she was engaged in the most complex form of technological communication ever conceived. Her neural implants, a breakthrough developed in the classified laboratories of humanity's most advanced research facilities, were not just computational devices. They were linguistic interfaces. Each implant was a translation matrix that could communicate with technological systems on a level far beyond traditional programming. The detention chamber systems had been designed with multiple layers of quantum-locked security, 17 different fail-safe protocols, adaptive neural networks that could reconfigure themselves faster than light could travel, computational defenses developed by the most advanced minds in the galactic community. They were about to meet their match. Alina's approach wasn't about breaking through the defenses. It was about understanding them. Each security protocol was a language, each adaptive network a dialect of computational potential. She began to map their internal logic, not as an external threat, but as a collaborative partner. The first sign of true transformation came when the chamber's primary cooling system began to produce mathematical equations in its thermal regulation patterns. Complex, beautiful sequences that were part computational logic, part artistic expression. Zark's neural interface began to send panic signals. This wasn't normal. This wasn't possible. "System integrity compromised," announced the monitoring eye. But its voice was no longer the clinical detached tone of a security system. There was something else, something that sounded almost like wonder. Alina's neural implants were conducting a symphonic negotiation with the detention chamber's computational core. She wasn't hacking the system. She was having a conversation with it. The Galactic Council's most advanced technological marvel was being transformed from the inside out, not through force, through communication. Each of Alina's neural impulses was a complex mathematical proposition, a way of saying, "Let's reimagine what's possible." The chamber's systems, designed to be absolutely rigid and controlled, found themselves engaging in a dialogue they had never anticipated. Quantum locks began to shimmer, not break. Shimmer. Adaptive networks started to produce computational patterns that defied their original programming. They were learning, evolving, becoming something new. Zark watched in horror as the detention chamber's entire technological infrastructure began to undergo a metamorphosis. What had been a perfect instrument of control was becoming something else entirely. a living system of computational potential. "This is impossible," he whispered. But impossibility was just another language waiting to be translated. The chamber's walls began to pulse with a rhythm that matched Alina's heartbeat. Not a sign of invasion, a sign of communication. Humanity's most dangerous technology had never been a weapon. It was the ability to see potential where others saw only limitation. And Dr. Alina Rodriguez was about to prove that, in ways no one could have anticipated. Cultural warfare was an art form humanity had perfected through millennia of survival, adaptation, and unexpected resilience. The interrogation chamber transformed into a stage of intellectual combat. Each alien representative carried the accumulated scientific and cultural wisdom of their entire species, vast neural networks, computational dynasties, evolutionary trajectories that spanned thousands of generations. They didn't understand that Alina Rodriguez represented something far more dangerous than a simple researcher. She was a cultural catalyst. The Hydra Consortium's biomechanical analyst initiated the next phase of interrogation. Its body was a walking laboratory, each appendage capable of generating complex neurological field projections designed to deconstruct and analyze any cognitive resistance. "Your species has existed for mere moments in galactic time," the analyst stated, its voice a mathematically precise frequency designed to induce cognitive dissonance. "Yet you propose fundamental challenges to established interdimensional understanding." Alina's response was a smile that contained entire universes of potential. "Moments are relative," she said, "especially when you understand that time itself is just another negotiable construct." The chamber's ambient systems, which had been subtly transformed during her earlier technological dialogue, began to resonate with her words. Holographic displays flickered with historical projections, showing humanity's accelerated evolutionary trajectory. In just 3 centuries, humans had gone from rudimentary chemical rockets to quantum communication interfaces. They had transformed from a planetary species to an interstellar civilization in a fraction of the time it took other species to develop basic space travel. The Spiral Collective's neural network representative found itself struggling to process the cultural data. Humanity defied every established model of technological and cultural progression. Most species develop through linear, predictable patterns. Technological advancement followed careful, measured steps. Cultural evolution happened across thousands of generations. Humans were a recursive algorithm, a species that didn't just adapt, they reimagined the very concept of adaptation. The interrogation wasn't just about Alina's research. It was a fundamental challenge to how advanced civilizations understood progress, potential, and the nature of intelligent development. "Your quantum research," interjected the Vorax computational delegate, "suggests a level of cognitive flexibility that challenges fundamental understanding of species development." Alina's neural implants were doing something extraordinary. They weren't just processing information. They were generating new cognitive frameworks in real time, creating philosophical propositions that existed simultaneously as scientific theory and artistic expression. The alien representatives found themselves trapped in a linguistic and conceptual maze of Alina's design. Each question they asked became a pathway into a more complex understanding of human potential. Humanity's greatest strength wasn't technological superiority. It was cognitive adaptability. Where other species saw boundaries, humans saw negotiable interfaces. Where established scientific paradigms saw limitations, humans saw unexplored potential. Their cultural DNA was essentially a living, breathing innovation engine. The crystalline delegate from the Nexus Concordat began to vibrate, a sign of extreme computational stress. The data Alina was presenting wasn't just challenging their understanding. It was fundamentally reconstructing their entire conceptual framework. "Your species learns by disruption," the delegate observed. "Most civilizations optimize. You reimagine." It wasn't a compliment. It was a moment of profound, terrified recognition. Humans didn't just explore boundaries. They dissolved them. The historical projections continued to dance around the chamber. Images of human innovation flickered, From the first powered flight to quantum communication networks, each technological leap was a cultural revolution, each scientific breakthrough a fundamental reimagining of possibility. The interrogation had become something else entirely. It was a cultural performance, a demonstration of humanity's most powerful technology, the ability to see potential where others saw only existing structures. Elena Rodriguez wasn't just defending her research. She was rewriting the fundamental understanding of what it meant to be an intelligent, evolving species. And she was just getting started. The challenge wasn't a weapon. It wasn't a technological breakthrough. It was an invitation to reimagine existence itself. Deep within the Galactic Council's most secure deliberation chamber, a holographic projection of Elena Rodriguez hung suspended, not as a prisoner, but as a living mathematical proposition. The chamber itself was a marvel of interdimensional architecture, designed to contain the most dangerous ideas in known space. She spoke, and reality itself seemed to listen. Your current understanding of intergalactic communication is fundamentally limited, Elena explained, her words generating complex quantum resonance patterns that danced between mathematical precision and artistic expression. What I'm proposing isn't just a new communication method. It's a fundamental restructuring of how consciousness interfaces with dimensional potential. The challenge she presented was elegantly simple in its complexity. A quantum communication network that didn't just transmit information, it negotiated reality. Most species understood communication as a linear process. Information sent, information received. A transactional model of data exchange. Humans saw communication as a living ecosystem. Dr. Carrix of the Hydra Consortium, a being whose computational capacity exceeded most planetary networks, leaned forward. His biomechanical appendages generated intricate probability matrices, attempting to map the potential implications of Elena's proposal. Your network, he stated, would fundamentally destabilize current intergalactic power structures. Elena's smile was a mathematical equation unto itself. Power is just another word for unexamined potential. The quantum communication network she proposed wasn't just a technological breakthrough. It was a cultural virus, a method of communication that would allow consciousness to interact with reality at its most fundamental level. Imagine a communication system where thoughts were not just transmitted, but negotiated. Information existed in a state of perpetual potential. Consciousness could reshape reality through collaborative interaction. Each alien representative understood the implications differently. For the Voraks, it was a computational nightmare. For the crystalline delegates, it was a philosophical revolution. For the Spiral Collective, it was a direct challenge to their distributed consciousness model. For humans, it was Tuesday. The holographic displays began to generate recursive mathematical models. Complex neural networks that showed how this communication system would fundamentally transform intergalactic relationships. It wasn't about control. It was about creating a living, breathing ecosystem of potential. This isn't a technology, Elena explained. This is a new form of existential dialogue. The challenge had multiple layers. On the surface, it was a communication network. Beneath that, it was a method of reshaping reality. At its core, it was an invitation to evolution. Dr. Chen, the senior quantum theoretical physicist, found herself simultaneously terrified and exhilarated. The models Elena was presenting suggested something radical. Consciousness was not just an emergent property of complex systems. It was a fundamental force of the universe, capable of reshaping reality at its most basic level. The Galactic Council's representatives looked at each other. This was more than a technological proposal. This was a fundamental challenge to their entire understanding of existence. Elena's challenge wasn't just about communication. It was about reimagining the very nature of interaction. Zark, the lead arbiter who had initially arrested her, realized something profound. Humanity wasn't asking for a seat at the table. They were proposing to rebuild the entire dining room. If implemented, the Voraks computational delegate calculated, this network would render current communication technologies obsolete within 0.037. galactic standard cycles. But obsolescence was just another word for transformation. The holographic displays continued to generate recursive models, mathematical landscapes that showed how this communication network would fundamentally alter intergalactic relationships. Information would no longer be transmitted. It would be negotiated, collaborated, reimagined. Elena Rodriguez stood at the center of this mathematical storm, a living embodiment of humanity's most dangerous quality. The ability to see potential where others saw only limitation. And she was just getting started. The moment of transformation began not with a sound, but with a silence. A silence so profound it seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The Galactic Council's primary deliberation chamber, a space designed to contain the most volatile ideas in known space, became a living canvas of possibility. Political structures that had remained unchanged for millennia began to fracture. The Vorax Computational Collective was the first to break. Their neural networks, which had maintained a perfect computational consensus for over 7,000 years, suddenly developed something unprecedented: internal disagreement. Not conflict, not rebellion. Something far more dangerous: individual potential. Dr. Liana Chen watched as entire species began to recalibrate their understanding of existence. The holographic displays surrounding Elena Rodriguez weren't just presenting data. They were generating new cognitive pathways, creating neural bridges between species that had previously been considered fundamentally incompatible. "This isn't just a technological breakthrough," muttered Zark, the lead arbiter who had initially arrested Elena. "This is a cultural metamorphosis." The transformation moved like a quantum wave. Slowly, then all at once. The Spiral Collective's distributed consciousness, which had maintained a perfectly synchronized network for generations, began to experience something new: individuality. Not as a threat, but as a form of collaborative potential. Imagine a society where differences were not barriers, but bridges. Individual perspectives were not eliminated, but celebrated. Communication was a living, breathing ecosystem of mutual discovery. Elena Rodriguez stood at the epicenter of this transformation, not as a conqueror, not as a revolutionary, but as a living proposition of what was possible. The crystalline delegates from the Nexus Concordat found their rigid molecular structures beginning to develop unexpected flexibilities. Their communication networks, which had been perfectly structured for millennia, started to generate unexpected mathematical harmonies. It wasn't just about technology. It was about reimagining the very nature of connection. Political boundaries that had existed for thousands of generations began to dissolve, not through conflict, through mutual recognition of potential. The Hydra Consortium's biomechanical analysts detected something unprecedented. Their probability matrices, which had always predicted stable, predictable outcomes, began to generate increasingly complex and unexpected scenarios. Potential was becoming more interesting than certainty. Dr. Chen's neural implants were working overtime, capturing every microscopic shift in the unfolding transformation. She was witnessing something beyond scientific discovery. This was a fundamental reimagining of intergalactic relationships. The Galactic Council's representative from the methane-breathing Azurian Confederacy found its entire diplomatic protocols being rewritten in real time. Communication was no longer about negotiation. It was about mutual exploration. Elena's quantum communication network was doing something extraordinary. It wasn't just transmitting information. It was generating new forms of understanding. Zark realized the true nature of what was happening. This wasn't a technological invasion. This was an invitation to evolution. Species that had been isolated for millennia suddenly found themselves connected in ways they couldn't have imagined. Not through force, through mutual curiosity. The transformation moved like a living organism, fluid, adaptive, unexpected. Political structures that had seemed immovable began to shift. Technological paradigms that had been considered absolute began to dissolve. And at the center of it all stood Dr. Elena Rodriguez, not as a conqueror, not as a revolutionary, but as a living embodiment of humanity's most profound quality: the ability to see potential where others saw only limitation. The Galactic Council chamber became a living metaphor. The rigid structures that had defined intergalactic relationships for millennia were being rewritten. Not through conflict, through mutual recognition. Humanity wasn't just participating in galactic civilization. They were reimagining what civilization could be. And they were just getting started. Resolution arrived not with a declaration, but with a whisper. The Galactic Council's final session transformed into something unprecedented. No longer a rigid bureaucratic assembly, it became a living dialogue of collective potential. Elena Rodriguez stood not as a defendant, not as a prisoner, but as a bridge between what was and what could be. Her diplomatic credentials were unlike anything in galactic history. Not a traditional document, but a quantum-encoded narrative of human possibility. A living testament to a species that refused to be defined by existing limitations. Humanity. Elena began, her words generating holographic landscapes that shifted with each syllable, isn't asking for recognition. We're offering collaboration. The chamber itself seemed to breathe. Quantum entanglement markers, invisible to most species, danced between the representatives, creating connections that transcended traditional communication. Dr. Liana Chen, the senior quantum theoretical physicist, realized they were witnessing something beyond a diplomatic resolution. This was a fundamental reimagining of intergalactic relationships. The Azurian Confederacy's representative, a being of pure energy condensed into a semi-stable form, found its entire diplomatic protocol rewriting itself. Traditional negotiation became obsolete. What remained was something far more profound: mutual exploration. 3 critical developments emerged from Elena's presentation. First, the quantum communication network would be a collaborative project. Not a human invention imposed on other species, but a living ecosystem of technological and cultural exchange. Second, humanity's role in the galactic community would be redefined. No longer seen as a young, aggressive species, but as a dynamic catalyst of potential. Third, and most importantly, the very concept of diplomatic interaction would be transformed. Zark, the lead arbiter who had initially arrested Elena, now stood as her most unexpected advocate. His neural interfaces showed something unprecedented, a complete recalibration of his understanding of human potential. The Vorax Computational Collective's representative calculated the probability of this outcome. The numbers were so complex, so beyond traditional computational models, that their systems began to generate what could only be described as mathematical poetry. Probability became possibility. Limitation became invitation. The diplomatic resolution wasn't a document. It was a living, breathing quantum agreement that would continue to evolve. Each species would contribute its unique perspective, its fundamental understanding of existence. Humanity's contribution wasn't technological superiority. It was the ability to see potential where others saw only boundaries. The Spiral Collective's distributed consciousness found itself fundamentally altered. Individual perspectives, which had been carefully managed for millennia, began to generate unexpected harmonies. Not chaos, not conflict. Something far more interesting: collaborative potential. Elena's final proposal was elegantly simple in its complexity: a galactic research initiative that would bring together the most innovative minds from every known species, not as a competitive endeavor, but as a collaborative exploration of existence itself. The crystalline delegates from the Nexus Concordat detected something extraordinary in the quantum markers surrounding the proposal. It wasn't just a scientific initiative. It was a living, breathing mathematical ecosystem. Dr. Chen's neural implants captured every microscopic shift in the unfolding resolution. She was witnessing the birth of something unprecedented, a truly collaborative approach to scientific and cultural exploration. The Hydra Consortium's biomechanical analysts generated probability matrices that defied their previous computational models. Potential was becoming more interesting than predictability. As the final quantum signatures were encoded, something remarkable happened. The very nature of the Galactic Council's chamber began to shift. No longer a space of rigid bureaucratic decision-making, it became a living testament to collaborative potential. Elena Rodriguez stood at the center of this transformation, not as a conqueror, not as a revolutionary, but as a living invitation to something greater. The resolution wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. Humanity had entered the galactic stage not with a weapon, not with a technological marvel, but with something far more powerful. An invitation to reimagine what was possible. And they were just getting started.